And welcome back to the Digital Legacy Podcast. It's your host, Daniel Sanchez, CEO of Reekolect, and I'm here today with our co-host, JC, our Director of Business Development and PR. How you doing today, JC?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing excellent. Can't complain. Excited for the holidays, everything's happening, so.
Nice.
Absolutely.
So am I.
Well, today we wanted to go ahead and take a different angle when it comes to the type of content that we want to shoot today. We want to discuss a couple controversial AI articles that have been out in the year of 2024. And the first one that we're going to go ahead and start on, and I just want to read a little bit about it, a little bit about the article and get your intake, and we can discuss that. And then our audience can go ahead and provide us any comments that they like us as well regarding the article. So let's start off right away.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So the first one I'd like to bring up, and this is from the source of Business Insider. And the headline goes like this under the tech category. Ex-Google CEO warns that perfect AI girlfriends could spell trouble for young men.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Mm-hmm.
There is no such thing as perfect and girlfriend.
That's true. Absolutely.
So I don't know about that article's a little off.
They're
right now,
already
if you ask
off,
me.
right? To a bad start. No, but definitely, right? I think when even before reading a little bit about the article, when we're talking about perfect, right? Perfection. I think one of the beauties of human beings is that we are slightly, some more than others, but flawed, right? In that sense of we all have different opinions, different views, and then you bring them together in a relationship, it's a perfect sometimes formula for chaos, but
Right.
It can also lead to growth, as we know, and a very strong relationship through our lifetime. But let's read a little bit about this article, and I want to get your take on it, JC. So a little bit here. So here we go. So people in 2024 aren't just swiping right and left on online dating apps. Some are crafting their perfect AI match and entering relationships with chatbots. Eric Schmidt, Google's former CEO, recently shared his concerns about young men creating AI romantic partners and said that he believes that AI dating will eventually increase loneliness. Furthermore, he said, this is a good example of an unexpected problem of existing technology. Schmidt said in a conversation about AI dangers and regulation on the Prof G show with Scott Galloway released Sunday, Schmidt said an emotionally and physically perfect AI girlfriend could create a scenario in which younger males become obsessed and allows the AI to take over their thinking. This kind of obsession is possible, Schmidt said in the interview, especially for people who are not fully formed. So what do you think about that, JC?
I mean, I think it's interesting. Number one, it's interesting how they only talk that it's girlfriend.
Right.
I guess it's just the angle from a man creating their,
Right, goes
their
both
perfect
ways,
girlfriend.
right.
But I think it should go both ways.
Of course.
So if we're talking about the capability of AI. And I think like everything else that we're seeing right now with AI, with social media, there's more and more of a disconnect with the true emotion.
Yes.
And I think that's where this is going to get a little bit complicated,
Right.
for lack of a better word. And I think that's what he refers to, where we have such a perception of what we think is perfect. I think without realizing sometimes our own imperfections, to your point, we're all flawed, that we're trying to create something that is really not capable of being.
I agree.
Okay. We all in our relationships on a day-to-day, whether we're married or have a girlfriend or whatever it is, it's always a give and take.
Mhm.
That's what makes the relationship work.
I agree, 100%.
There is more give and take at different times of our relationships based on the needs of each individual. And if we're trying to create something that's always going to be perfect, I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves at that point, because we're not being able to give back what those needs are for that other individual that is so quote unquote perfect.
Right.
I think that's where the issue lies. And then there's an expectation, and I think that's what he's referring to about being dangerous for those young men, and since that's what the article states, that are trying to get this perfection and then expecting to find that in the real world. That perfection that they create is based on their ideology of what has been formed right now in their lives, and that's going to change as they mature. So I think it's scary, to put it that way.
I could agree with you. I want to play the devil's advocate here and look at it from two angles, right? But first of all, let me share my own experience. I believe that when you enter into a relationship with a organic, let's call it a human being,
Real?
not, say with an actual human being that's real, that, you can touch and feel and connect with, more importantly. There's that emotional connection that I believe that really allows a relationship to go as far as it can, right? If you're connecting with an AI bot that will, to some degree, ensure that everything that they communicate, they feel that you will likely respond well to and will enjoy, unless you program it and so on. But what I'm trying to say here is that if you have an AI that's constantly going to say the same thing in the sense of please you in every single interaction, never get frustrated, never get mad, never show any other emotion than happy, I feel that you're really losing sight of what a relationship can offer. Right. I feel that as we all know, when we first start a relationship, you have what's called the butterflies, right? The butterflies where everybody feels great, it's happy, it's emotional, it's beautiful, it's perfect to that point. But then as time goes by, you are two different individuals. You do have your own point of views, and then there's conflict. Now, instead of looking at it in a bad way, saying, well, if I'm constantly fighting with somebody I love, why wouldn't an AI bot that will please me and say everything that I want to hear work better for me? No, I think you're losing the point of what relationships are. When you have that conflict and you're able to see each other and defend your point of view, and then to at some point arrive to that compromise, that whole journey, that whole process, I feel personally, allows you to thrive in a relationship and develop love.
Are we talking about makeup sex?
Because that's a lot to talk about. That's one of the beautiful things as well. But I agree with that.
I am going to tell you this, though. We are saying that that's important for a relationship because that's what our experiences show us. Mm-hmm. It's that constant flux, that up and down to become a better and stronger relationship.
Right.
If somebody is able to create their perfect mate or girlfriend, they won't know that. So because that's missing doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to work for them.
Right.
I mean, if we want to get technical about it.
It's true.
They would never experience those down moments.
Right.
It would always be a high. It would always be butterflies in your stomach, I'm assuming, unless there's a way for that AI to be conflicted. But from what it's sounding, it's going to be a perfect relationship. Meaning you never get upset, meaning you never, take it to that level. But then again, how is that AI going to, let's face it, part of a relationship is the physical aspect.
Right.
Whether it's as simple as holding hands.
Of course.
So obviously a lot more intimate. How is that going to be made up? There is augmented reality, there's virtual reality. There's
robots soon,
but now we're talking about, now we're talking about creating a physical robot.
Right.
In conjunction with that, and if that's what's being referred to, then it's just of course completely different ballgame.
I agree.
But I do think from an emotional point, they would be able to adapt and always please. But I don't know, as humans, to your point, if that's necessarily healthy for us.
I agree.
And I think that's where the caveat comes in.
I agree. And 2 points I want to make, again, to play the devil's advocate here. Number one, let's look at the positive, right? The positive here is that you could be able to go ahead and interact. It could bring you emotional connection. It's something that Reekolect that we're counting on to be able to connect, provide, someone that's perhaps grieving through a process of losing a loved one, be able to, bring closure to that passing and then still remain connected and so on. But I'm looking at, because the article refers to young men. So using AI to connect. So I believe that young men can perhaps, number one, begin using ChatGPT, perhaps to give them some sort of stepping stone, right? To how can I approach a girl? What's the best way to be able to interact with her? Give me an idea of what I should be working with, which I totally understand, right? You want to brush up a little bit on understanding how to approach a lady.
So we're gonna use now ChatGPT for one-liners.
Well, it could work. It could work if you make her smile, and you're able to get that date and that second date.
Yeah, I guess. But I think it goes back to it's emotional,
right? It's an emotional connection,
and I think if we keep trying to take away that, which is the fear of AI right now,
right?
That it's just drained of emotion, even though it learns. You have all the LMMs, and we learn from it. That's where I think it poses a dangerous proposition.
Right. And I think that's the other side as well. So on one side, I'm saying it could optimize your interaction. Now, using it as a tool, as we do everything. It's just like cologne, or you put a peppermint in your mouth so your breath doesn't smell bad when you're talking to a lady or a partner, whoever it may be. Again, these are tools that we're using. Now, let's play the other side, which I've seen this as well. What's happening with a lot of the youth, that they have this persona online and on social media, but what happens the moment they actually see someone that they like in person,
Butterflies.
face to face, other than butterflies, they get extremely nervous
Yeah.
because those skills that we, so depend on, our ability to communicate, I believe, determines our level of success in life. And if you're not successful in being able to close a partner because you just don't know how to interact with them when they're directly in your face. I see the youth and text messages, talking about young men, they have this bad boy and confident persona. But once you see, who they like in the flesh, it's a completely different ballgame.
But I think that just goes to prove that using AI, even ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever we're going to use for ideas to become better at being emotional with someone or connecting with someone is probably not the right way to go.
Right.
Because let's face it, back in the day, you would have a phone call, speak to them in person. You didn't become as nervous, even though it was always nervous to go across the room to ask a girl to dance or do whatever you wanted. But there was more relationships that were based purely on looking eye to eye, having that conversation.
Exactly.
That's shifted now to text messaging. And you feel, to your point, the boys feel, oh my God, I'm all this macho guy and I can write all these things.
Right.
But when they have to say it in person, it's sort of,
that's the difference.
Tail between their. So I think that's what happens there. And I think at that point, what we're doing with the AI and the ChatGPT is going to make that more difficult for those relationships to actually flourish. And I think the article points about how dangerous that can be in the formative years. And you're going to ask ChatGPT and it's going to base it on the norm or the most popular.
Exactly.
Answers that they could be, how to approach a girl, how to do this. That girl on the other side has different emotions, has different things that will respond to her. So now what am I going to tell ChatGPT? Oh, it's this girl. She's so, this is her height. This is how she looks. This is her family background. What should I do? Yeah. We're going to get that specific.
Very transactional as well.
Very transactional. Yeah. And that was my point to it. And that makes now the relationship possibly very transactional.
I agree.
Rather than emotional.
I agree.
And I think that's the part. And I think that's where, while the article doesn't go that in depth, when he says the concern about the formative years.
Of course.
Because
it's what follows.
What follows. And we're talking about a relationship, but that now leads to a relationship with your boss at work, a business relationship. How these young individuals are going to say, okay, this is how I handle it. This is how I do it because it's being told to me by this AI, or I'm creating the perfect AI. What happens when now you have to encounter somebody at work? It's going to affect you down the line.
Exactly. That communication skills, all of that. I agree. And then also, quickly, before we transition over, we also got to look at the implications of if this does become something that the new generations are adopting. I believe we can use the example of Japan, where they have a declining population. There are economical and as well as, human effects that come from this particular interaction of not, mating, not increasing the population. So there are specific ways that this becomes detrimental to the growth of a country, the growth of a civilization, the growth of humans overall, and being able to thrive. So that's something else to look at as well.
That's already started to happen to us. I remember when I was young, family dinner every night. Everybody would sit at the table,
of course, religiously.
And, we'd talk about the day, or even if you didn't talk about the day, you had to sit down, you had to do your thing.
Tell me something.
Tell me something, right. And that has also shifted.
Of course.
As my girls grew up, now my grandkids, there's a desire to still keep that together, but it's a lot more difficult because of those human interactions becoming more and more loose. And I think if we continue down that route, that road, now it becomes, to your point, Japan is something that's, in my opinion, a problem because of civilization and
a lot of
other factors are there.
I agree.
But that interaction is what's going to be missing. And, I would hope that one of the things we're trying to do here at Reekolect is try to bring that back a little bit. We can't force people to change, but we can try to remind them.
Exactly.
And we can lead with an example of that.
Stay true to those roots, traditions. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So again, to that point, I understand the CEO's warning. I think we shouldn't take it lightly. It's something to have a conversation with your families. And again, to JC's point, at Reekolect, in short, what we want to do is be able to not only revolutionize the way we connect and remember through our app, but as well as preserve some of that tradition of ensuring that we keep it emotional, have that connection, and move on. Now, I think the next article that I think, it does transition very well to is regarding a very tragic case with a 14-year-old gentleman here, which I'll pull up you probably heard of it, but here we go. So this one's from the New York Times, the source. And the headline is, "Can AI be blamed for a teen suicide?" So quickly here, this was a mother of a 14-year-old Florida boy says he became obsessed with a chatbot on character.ai before his death. So on the last day of his life, Sewell, and sorry if I'm butchering that name, Sewell Setzer III, took out his phone and text his closest friend, a lifelike AI chatbot named after Daenerys Targaryen, a character from the Game of Thrones. "I miss you, baby sister," he wrote. "I miss you too, sweet brother," the chatbot replied. Sewell, a 14-year-old ninth grader from Orlando, Florida, had spent months talking to a chatbot on character.ai, a role-playing app that allows users to create their own AI characters or chat with characters created by others. Sewell knew that Danny, as he called the chatbot, not me, but again, as he called the chatbot, wasn't a real person, and that its responses were just outputs of an AI language model, and that there was no human on the other side of the screen typing back. And he also never forgot that there was a message displayed above all the chats reminding him that everything the character says is made up. So that was there on a side note. But he developed an emotional attachment with it. He texts with the bot constantly, updating it dozens of times a day on his life. And then as well as when it comes to the content of these conversations, the chats got romantic and somewhat sexual at times. So with that, Sewell's parents and friends had no idea he had fallen for the chatbot. And eventually they noticed that he was isolating himself and pulling away from the real world. His grades had suffered. He began getting in trouble in school and lost interest in a lot of things. So as we move on with the article, it basically says here that Sewell was also diagnosed with mild Asperger's syndrome as a child, but he never had any serious behavioral or mental health problems before. Essentially, what happened here as the article goes on is that as they engaged, it looks like the context of the particular conversation led up where the chatbot had basically said, "Please come home to me as soon as possible, my love." And the gist of it is that through this conversation, this 14-year-old boy ended up misinterpreting what the chatbot was saying to him and eventually took his own life, which is absolutely tragic. And I feel for the parents, no matter what the situation was, to even think about losing a child at 14 years old over technology. Right. I mean, I can only imagine how the parents feel and the impact that this made. But one thing I do want to ask you, JC, before we dive into this and pack that, one specific notice that here was about Asperger's syndrome. And again, excuse me, but I'm not too familiar with the particular syndrome. Do you have any insight into the early?
I don't want to give a diagnosis. Right. But Asperger is on the autism spectrum.
Okay.
And it relates. Usually, they're very high functioning or higher functioning, and usually are captivated with one thing.
Okay.
Or an interest in something. And I'm being very layman's term in the description, but. When I was in the educational world, I dealt with a couple of students that had Asperger's.
Okay.
Some, from what it says there was mild, and from what the other things related to what you're saying as far as how he did in school and different subject areas must have been very mild, because these students usually are pretty obsessed. If they're, the Asperger's is high level.
Okay.
They're very fixated on something.
So do they excel in their studies, or
they tend to,
okay.
But it can be specific. It varies from individual to individual. I think the fact that there might have been some underlying is what could have become obsessive with the chatbot. I can see that happening. But let's face it, even if there is no type of Asperger, autism, or any other type of disability, special education disabilities. Anybody can become obsessed with something like this as far as how these AI chatbots can work. And I think that's the part that, that speaks to it. I think we have to put that aside about the Asperger's and just talk about the individual.
Right.
That's something that I think regardless of what was there, it became so consuming. It might have had a little part of it, but I think it just became so real to him that's what led him to do what he did.
Okay.
Which, it's just unspeakable.
I understand that. So You're referring to the Asperger's, right? And I just want to understand a little bit more about this. So it looks like that, they seem to excel in their particular areas and they seem to be very sharp. But would you say that perhaps from emotional intelligence, they struggle a bit, would you say?
I mean, it's more of a social.
Okay.
I mean, it's like I said, it's on the autism spectrum, so
Mhm.
they tend to, not communicate socially, be
Okay.
socially awkward.
Okay.
And then again, I don't want to diminish or encompass everybody on the spectrum
course, of
with
course, of
one
course.
blanket. I'm just trying to speak to what was said there. So I repeat, if it's underlined, I can see it being enhanced with
I
what he
see
was
that.
doing
I see.
because it allowed him to socialize without that awkwardness that
Right.
he would have to face, on a daily basis.
And I see that. And I, in the company's defense of a character.ai, I mean, I understand it. They had it clear on all the interactions. Hey, this is all made up, right? I mean, and this is something that Reekolect also takes into consideration when it comes to privacy, security, and also being clear about, these interactions are AI generated and it's something that you should be aware of. But I think when we're looking at, a 14-year-old that potentially socially might have been hindered a bit due to what he was, lightly diagnosed with. Perhaps he didn't have the ability to discern, to determine, okay, he got consumed by the conversation. And I get that. At 14 years old, I mean, what are you thinking? You're having this interaction. It's kind of like video games, right? It's kind of like, it's a video game, but at some point you get consumed, much like we do when watching a movie and you
Right.
fall into the storyline. What happened to this 14-year-old that really drove him to really believe and create this reality around him. And with the technology, it felt so real. And I think the biggest problem here was that he himself misinterpreted what was being said, and it consumed him, perhaps of such a young age, not having yet that development in his personality, mentally, and saying, "Hey, hold on a second, this is just an AI. This is not something real." And again, in short, got consumed and took his own life,
Yeah,
which is
I
tragic.
mean, I think there's a couple of things there that I'd like to speak to. Number one, the part about being consumed, and they talk about, the disclaimers. It's going to draw you in. I mean, you can do all the disclaimers you
course.
want if it goes unsupervised.
Correct.
If it just you allow, your child, and I'm not putting anything on the parents,
Right.
but I think it makes us more aware of how much how much more vigilant we have to be.
We have to be.
Because we assume that some of these things that allow kids to get into are safe. And it may look like that on the surface, but I think it's the continual monitoring that we have to be very careful of. I don't know if you're familiar with, catfishing.
Of course.
That, that's
Hasn't
something.
happened to me, but
Yeah,
I know
well,
what you're saying.
I've dealt with students that were victims of
Yeah,
catfishing.
of course.
Back when, the MySpace and the Facebooks and all
Yes.
this.
Yes.
And imagine without AI that another individual can convince somebody that somebody likes them, or some,
Of course.
or even a group of people that are, fake accounts and fake social media presence and all that. If that was being done with just Facebook and, and all these other social media platforms, imagine now AI or character AI that can develop these characters
Exactly.
and make you believe that they're real
With precision.
with precision, because it's learned
Right.
and continues to learn on a
Mhm.
daily basis. That's a problem.
Yeah.
And it will continue to be a problem. And the only way to do it is to keep monitoring, because listen, some adults can fall for it. So if adults fall for it, it might be wise. And I'm not going to speak like I'm the almighty parent,
Of course. Of course.
because many mistakes I've made. I think, part of it was being vigilant, but also getting lucky.
Yeah.
That things didn't, with my own kids, they were spared a lot of things that some other kids are not.
Mhm.
And I think it's just, we have to assume we always have to be engaged.
Of course.
And now with AI being part of the equation, I think it leads to a heightened level that is needed.
Absolutely.
And that's the important part, in my opinion.
And one point I want to make as well, and I believe on this podcast we want to make sure that everyone can always freely express their point of view and everything respected and debated, right? But me personally, I believe that when you're talking about a minor, someone that's not fully developed yet or have gone through a number of challenges and obstacles in life that's allowed them to have the right type of experience to be able to determine, what's real, what's not real, what's right and wrong. I believe it does fall on the parents, because clearly he started showing a decline in grades. He started showing basically socially he was withdrawing himself, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's why it's so important that parents nowadays, let's embrace technology absolutely for its good, but also understand the bad and ensure that you're having these conversations with your children. Talk about AI, talk about what the dangers of AI are. And to your point about catfishing and so on, if children are not aware and we're not having these conversations, at the dinner table, one-on-one, when we're together, then they're going to take it, as at face value. They're not really going to know. But if we can have these conversations and saying, listen, this is new. I get it. This is the new technology. Let's not completely live in a hole and get away from it. Let's embrace it. Let's use it as a tool, but let's also understand how this can be dangerous to our overall existence and who we are. Right?
Yeah, and like you said, I hate to say it's the parents' fault. We don't know how quickly the downward spiral with grades and all that went. And there are a lot of things that go into effect with something like this, but we do have to monitor, and just be, it doesn't mean it would have prevented it, but it could maybe have helped.
I think so. I think so. I strongly feel that, again, if we're having conversations with our children, and that's what the Reekolect app strives to do, let's use technology to recapture content in a different way, in a meaningful way.
Right.
We should be able to sit down and have a conversation like, listen, we are moving ahead in life. Things are progressing quickly. But we have to have conversations about the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly. I think that relationship between, parents and their children not only allows for, tragic situations like this to be, less likely to happen and potentially avoided, right? But also strengthens the ability, strengthens the relationship as a whole, and being able to say, well, you know what, mom and dad, they are aware. They are aware of this technology. They're not so old school that they're completely,
which is a major thing right now. I mean, most kids don't talk to you because they think you don't understand.
They think you don't understand, right? So
Sometimes
I think it's important. And we don't. I mean, there's a lot of new stuff that I agree with, despite us being in tech and so on. But again, I think my point of view is the parents need to have this conversation, build that relationship with the children, feel that comfortableness to have the discussion. And, if you do see certain signs like this, dig in deeper, and leverage help as well if you have to. If you have difficulty in speaking with your, son or daughter or whatever it may be,
and we know how
family.
much they enjoy the technology and the AI components of everything that we're doing, whether they are aware of it or not. And I think using our app is a way to sort of, cross that bridge.
Exactly.
And use it in a meaningful way. A way that they understand it, a way that makes sense for the family.
Let's touch our roots, our tradition.
Correct.
Let's remember who we are as a family. And that's really the point, which is an excellent point that you're making as well. Well, JC, I love this, right? We were able to touch on two very controversial articles that came out. We would love to see our audience. Please comment. Let us know how you feel about this. Do you agree with myself, with JC, or do you completely disagree? We want to hear your voice. We want you to express what you think about these particular topics. And if you feel that Reekolect can help you address these type of concerns that we have in society as well. But aside from that, as always, JC, it's always a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Where do I go for my perfect girlfriend?
Go to no, but again, and to that company, nothing to character.ai. We understand it's difficult to introduce technology, but again, the point that we're saying is that it's a double-edged sword in everything. You can cook with fire, but you can also commit arson and burn yourself. So something to think about. But join us until next time. Thank you very much for joining us. And until the next time, stay tuned.